strike in the night. Too many people, and not enough lifeboats. Families are ripped apart. Can they survive the sinking of Hitler's super ship? The story begins in East Prussia, a province on the eastern edge of the Nazi Empire. Hitler's weakened army is fighting the Allied forces in the west and the Soviets in the east.
One woman said, "But our Führer won't allow the Russians into our beautiful East Prussia." We hoped right to the end. It was so unimaginable to just leave everything, to just go.
January 12th, the Russian army's assault on East Prussia begins. For the Germans, the battle's already lost, and the Nazis know it.
If you look at the Eastern Army Group's plans, they had no idea what to do. They had far too little equipment, they had no petrol, they had too few weapons, the soldiers were exhausted, and basically they knew that when the Russians attacked, they would make big operational breakthroughs.
The Russians, the world's largest army, advance along a 900-mile front, deep into Germany's East Prussian provinces. They're bigger and better equipped. They want revenge against the Nazi Germany.
An eye for an eye, a life for a life. Deep inside, each of us only had that one thought. They couldn't expect sympathy from us. No way, no, no, no. They came to us with a sword, now they will die by the sword.
For the past 3 years, Germany has decimated the Russian homeland. Murder and destruction on a scale never seen before. And suffering.
Millions and millions of innocent civilians died. They were our people. Our villages and towns were destroyed, along with so much property. Of course, that made us want revenge. It made us want to get our own back.
Russians go from town to town, killing German civilians. The Nazi leaders offer no help. Only a few will manage to escape the advancing army.
If you wanted to take a train, you needed a special permit. Trains are there to carry guns. You can ride when victory comes. That was written up at every station.
Erich Koch, the Nazi leader of East Prussia, refuses to allow his citizens to leave. He smiles for the camera, while secretly he plans his own escape.
Most often it was the party leaders who fled first, without giving the order to evacuate. Basically the same thing happened everywhere. The front came closer and closer, and then retreating German army units came past and said, "Get out of here, the Russians are coming." And there were still no orders to evacuate.
To stay behind means almost certain death. So many families pack their life's belongings and hit the road, despite the ban. With their men on the front lines, women, children, and the elderly make the trek alone. Hundreds of thousands take to the long roads out of East Prussia. Many of them head to the Baltic Sea in the hopes of sailing westward.
I won't forget that picture as long as I live. The endless line of wagons, the wheels squeaking quietly in the snow, the horses snorting through their nostrils, the steam mixing with the icy winter air. It was ghostly and completely silent, except for the snorting of the horses and the squeaking of the wheels.
The refugees encounter the retreating Nazi forces.
The orders were clear. The wagons had to get off the roads. The generals commanding army groups and individual armies passed the order down the line. And those pictures, those terrible pictures of the wagons lying in ditches, it's perfectly possible the Wehrmacht did that. They cracked down hard.
The Russian army approaches the Baltic, cutting East Prussia off from the rest of Germany. On January 21st, the Soviets finally reached the port of Elbing, where Naval Auxiliary Osula Reisas is stationed.
There was a thundering and a thudding, and the door was ripped open, and a soldier stood there shouting, "Move, move, the Russians are here. Their tanks have reached the town."
Reisas flees Elbing as the Soviets take over. East Prussia is now completely cut off. For the refugees, there are only two ways to escape, either by ship from the port of Pillau or over the frozen waters of the Hof Bay. Their goal is Gotenhafen, where large ships are waiting to sail westward to safety. One is the Wilhelm Gustloff. But the army has commandeered every freight ship to transport soldiers and equipment to help the war effort.
This was how a ship's load was allocated. 40% for the wounded, 40% military equipment, 20% refugees. The military had absolute priority. And it wasn't about saving refugees. That was what you might call coincidental. It was improvised. You took refugees along if you happened to have the space.
The Wilhelm Gustloff is the Nazis' super ship. It's a floating barrack and a U-boat training school. The Gustloff is ordered to bring its 1,000 U-boat cadets back to Kiel in western Germany to fight and evacuate refugees if there's room. Between the Gustloff and the refugees lie the frozen waters of the Hof. And it's the coldest winter in decades.
You kept walking. Keep going, faster, keep going. The faster the better. Everyone was scared. Country people were afraid to be driving over the water, over the ice.
Tens of thousands die along the way. And the Russian tanks are close behind.
I remember driving right by some of those wagons. I wasn't the least bit interested whether the civilians on them were alive or dead. We had to advance. Forwards, forwards, forwards.
Russian tanks run down any stragglers. The Nazis refused to surrender Königsberg, the capital. With most of the army gone, teenagers and old men struggled to defend it. Local citizens must decide to stay or flee. Jürgen Darnell is 12 years old when the Russians arrive.
Granddad said, they've made Königsberg a fortress city. Out, out. We have to make sure we get out of here to Pillau to see if we can get a ship. So we set off. Come on, children, come on.
Refugees walk 25 miles in sub-zero temperatures.
Anyone who couldn't go on sat down in the ditch beside the road. I saw a few people sitting down a little way back, you know. And you wondered, what are they doing there? They've got to get up, they're already all white. And at some point, God had taken pity on them, and he'd sent this great shroud.
In Pillau, the last few boats are leaving for Gotenhafen.
The people were just standing there. Then Mother yelled, I have 4 children and my father. Then they had to let us on. The others had to stay behind.
It's a freezing overnight trip from Pillau to Gotenhafen. They arrive and find the city spilling over with refugees desperate to get on the Gustloff. 16-year-old Helmut Angler is drafted to help keep order.
Gotenhafen had 240,000 inhabitants, and then came 120,000 more. Every one of them, without exception, whether they were children or adults, they all looked at the very end of their tether. It was a hard thing to see.
Outside, it's dangerously cold.
There was a woman standing there with a child, tucked in a pillow. I can still see it quite clearly. She was holding the pillow around the child. The child was dead, but the woman didn't see that. She kept looking at this child. It was dead, but she held it in her arms. It was her child.
To those waiting, the Wilhelm Gustloff is a symbol of hope. But it's in a restricted military area. No one will get on without a pass.
We were registered. We were in the Navy. We had papers we could present. We belonged.
There are tickets for big families and for some privileged categories.
They sorted through these people, checking for party membership. That still counted at first. But the people on the quayside were hungry. They were thirsty. They were freezing. They pushed their way onto the ship. They couldn't do anything about it. They had to let them on.
Eventually, the soldiers give up checking for tickets. And Jürgen Darnell and his family make it on.
Mother said, now we've made it, children. No more wet gloves, no wet feet. It was a poem, it was hope.
Over 10,000 passengers pile on board.
In all the great salons, people were lying next to each other, mattress next to mattress, one with a mother and 2 children, and everything completely full. The smell got stronger and stronger. Babies pooed in their nappies. The old people couldn't make it to the toilets because the corridors were too crowded.
Ursula is on board with her sister Rosemarie. Together, they stake out a corner in one of the salons.
There were 300 naval auxiliaries. They were all billeted in the swimming pool, and we wanted to join them. But there wasn't any room left, so we were stuck in the corner of a salon.
The girls are happy to be safe on the great ship. But the Gustloff's officers are worried. The ship has bomb damage and hasn't been to sea for 4 years. Now they're about to set sail in dangerous waters with thousands of civilians on board and lifeboats for only half of them. It's January 1945, and the Nazi warship, the Wilhelm Gustloff, is filled with civilian refugees fleeing the advancing Soviet army. Over 10,000 passengers are on board, mostly women and children. But the lifeboats have capacity for only half that number.
I thought, we're safe now, and this unsinkable ship is going to take us west.
For months, Soviet submarines have been breaking through to the Baltic Sea, but they haven't been a big threat.
In previous years, they had only limited success, so it could well be that the Germans rather underestimated the danger from Soviet submarines.
Escort ships protect merchant ships from torpedo attacks. But by 1945, cruisers and destroyers are in short supply in the Baltic. Although they know the risk of submarine attack, the Gustloff decides not to wait for an escort. On January 30th, 1945, the Wilhelm Gustloff set sail.
We're on our way to freedom. You really can't describe that feeling. It was uplifting. It was warm. Everyone had settled down. Everything was quiet. And we were underway.
In less than 3 hours, the Gustloff reaches the open sea. On the bridge, heated discussions develop between the ship's commanders. The Gustloff's official captain, Friedrich Petersen, is a merchant marine officer. There are 2 additional captains and a first officer with a captain's license. The 1,000 U-boat cadets on board are under the command of Lieutenant Commander Wilhelm Sahn. Arguments erupt on the bridge over which course they should take. There are 2 possibilities. If they stay close to the coast, they'll be safe from submarines, but the waters are full of mines. Or there's a deep water route known as Lane 58, which is regularly swept clear of mines. Submarines could be lurking here, but if all goes well, this is the quicker route. Gustloff's U-boat crews are expected in Kiel as soon as possible, so the captains choose Lane 58. What they don't know is that cruising nearby is a Soviet submarine, the S-13. It's been on patrol since January 11th, with a clear mission.
Our mission was the same as always, to destroy the enemy. We were to look for transport ships and sink them.
S-13's commander, Alexander Marinesko, needs a victory. His patrol should have started 9 days earlier, but he went missing and no one could find him. A high treason offense. This is his last chance to redeem himself. He's been at sea for weeks, but hasn't seen a single German ship. Then S-13 receives a signal. German freighters are evacuating to the west. It's time to make a move. On the Gustloff, the war seems far away.
Next to us there sat two East Prussian farmers' daughters, I think. Plump and very gay and rosy cheeks. They were simply adorable, laughing and telling each other jokes and getting to know people, and there was a very good atmosphere on the ship.
Es war eine gute Stimmung auf dem Schiff.
16-year-old Eva Boden and her sister Dorit and their mother are refugees from Gotenhafen on the Gustloff.
We felt we were already safe.
It could be a busy night on Lane 58. Gustloff's commanders worry they might collide with other German ships in the dark. After another heated debate on the bridge, the captains switch on the navigation lights. This is against all the rules. The Gustloff keeps moving forward. An hour later, the lights are switched off again. But it's too late.
Держать дистанцию, медленно преследуем.
The Russians spot them and take up pursuit. The S-13 can't keep up underwater. The Gustloff is moving quickly. The submarine surfaces to increase its speed. Two hours later, the Soviet sub catches up with the Gustloff. Crew members take their stations.
From the sound, I could hear that it was a twin screw ship. That meant it had to be very big. If it had been an ordinary freighter, it would have sounded like this. But you couldn't tell from the sound of the propellers whether it was a warship or not.
When he looked through his periscope, Marinesko could see that it was big, and it wasn't a warship. But he couldn't tell what it was carrying, wood or weapons or people. How could he tell that? He was simply pursuing a big transport ship. That was all. He was following his orders to sink large warships and freighters. And that's what he did.
Marinesko orders a daring maneuver. They'll sail around the Gustloff and attack from the shore side, as Gustloff's lookouts concentrate on the other direction. This is the best chance Marinesko has to avoid any escort ships in the darkness.
If we had been spotted by convoy escorts, that would have been the end of us. We would never have got out of there alive.
The Russians prepare to attack. While on board the Gustloff, the refugees believe the worst is finally behind them. It's January 30th, the 12th anniversary of Hitler's rise to power. The Führer addresses the nation, and passengers listen on board. The message is familiar: the need for loyalty, the need to hold out everywhere under all circumstances until Germany's efforts are finally crowned in victory.
Suddenly there was an explosion, and a second, and a third, and there was a clanking sound.
And Mother yelled, "Children, out, out, we've hit a mine."
We climbed over people. I can still feel that softness under my feet. People were lying there. No one knew what to do. And the loudspeaker kept saying, "Stay calm, stay calm." And people started screaming and running, and no one knew where to.
Keiner wusste wohin.
The first torpedo hits just off the bows and destroys the crew's living quarters. The second explodes right under the swimming pool, killing over 360 Navy auxiliaries camped inside. The third torpedo hits the engine room and rips through the side of the ship up to the railings. Everyone in the lower decks dies within seconds.
Everyone was pushed towards the lower promenade deck. And of course that went for my sister Rosemary and me too. I had grabbed her hand and didn't let it go.
The lower promenade deck is lined entirely with safety glass. They're running into a death trap.
My sister was standing beside me and I said to her, "Ulla, now we're going to die." "No," she said, and she grabbed my hand again.
I said, "No, we're not going to die. I don't want to die." And I took off my shoe and tried to break the window with it. But it didn't work. And then an officer, or one of the sailors, kept shooting at the window. And then we could push it out.
The sisters are washed overboard and separated.
All of a sudden I realized there's water in my ears, in my nose, my mouth. God, I think, please let me lose consciousness. Let me die quickly. Just want to die quickly. And suddenly I've got air again.
On the upper decks, the crew struggles to launch the lifeboats. The rafts are frozen and the riggings are iced over. They manage to lower only a few. It's a fight for survival.
A man wanted to get in, had a scarf around his head. He was shoving his way through. "I want to get into the boat, want to get in." And the sailor officer saw him and forced him back. "Women and children only. Women and children only." He was thrashing around. He just had to get onto the boat. And the officer shot him.
The ship is tilting hard to the left. On deck, passengers hold on for dear life.
Beside me, a woman was hanging on, and next to her 2 children, and next to them a man. He was the only uniformed man I'd seen on board with a swastika armband. The woman kept screaming at him, "Finish it, finish it." Then he took out his pistol, still holding on with one hand, and first he shot the 2 little girls, and then his wife. And then he held the pistol to his own temple, and it didn't go off. He'd run out of bullets. He yelled at me, "Give me your pistol." And I shouted back, "I haven't got one." And then he let go and slid after his dead wife and his children across the icy, snow-covered deck and over the side.
As thousands battle for survival, commanders choose to save themselves. 13-year-old Gunther Meidel makes a discovery.
We got to this cutter. It was pretty full. And among others, there was Captain Peterson, who was supposed to be responsible for the ship as commanding officer. He was an older man. He was already there.
The captain won't be going down with his ship.
We had the impression, and certainly they said later, that he had got into the boat quite early on because he said, "This is the only chance I have of saving myself."
Thousands of people still on board the Gustloff climb upwards as the ship sinks.
We climbed onto the rigging. Me first. My mother handed me my sister. I sat her down beside me. I simply sat her down at my feet. If it had been my child, I would probably have put her between my feet. And then I gave my mother my hand. And my mother was gone. Nothing but water. I looked for... I wanted to give my sister my hand or hold her tight. My sister was gone.
Her sister Dorrit is just 6 years old. She and her mother drown in the freezing waters of the Baltic.
The last thing she said was, "Eva," or "Evie, how lucky I am that I have you." Isn't that awful? And I didn't save her.
Mobs fight over life rafts. It's every man for himself.
A big wave came. Mother shoved us onto a raft, an 8-man raft, I can still remember. And she pushed Manfred onto a small 4-man raft. And she held on to that. And then the wave dragged us away from the ship.
All 3 brothers do make it on the same life raft.
That was something. 3 of us together. But where's Mother? Where's Hannelore, our sister? Where's Granda?
They all survive except Jogan's grandfather, who led the family from the ruins of Königsberg to the safety of the boat. After 62 minutes, the Wilhelm Gustloff sinks beneath the Baltic Sea. It's -4 degrees. The water's just above freezing. Passengers can survive for only minutes.
I was swimming behind a life raft. People were hanging on like bunches of grapes, holding on to one another. They tried to hold on to me. I kicked them away. I tell you quite honestly, I kicked them away because they would have dragged me under.
She manages to climb onto a raft.
There were children floating around us, wearing life jackets. And just imagine, their heads are much, much heavier than their feet. And their heads were in the water, and their little legs were poking up in the air. Afterwards, I could never sing songs to my own child about little ducklings. It still upsets me today.
Das bedrückt mich heute noch.
Now there's nothing to do but wait.
I kept thinking, why is no one rescuing us? Why is no one here? And everyone started shouting in a chorus, Help! You can't describe that cry.
Just a few miles away is the German Navy cruiser the Admiral Hipper and a torpedo boat escort. They answer the rescue call, but the Hipper already has 2,000 people on board. They're afraid of another torpedo attack.
Und dann sind sie weggefahren.
And then they sailed away
Man
again.
hat uns
They've
vergessen.
forgotten us.
Natürlich war das ein
Of course, there was a feeling of despair that you'd never forget for the rest of your life.
das man im Leben
You're
niemals
floating in a
vergisst.
little nutshell,
Sie sind
and they
da in
just
einer
sail away.
Nussschale und die Schiffe fahren weg. Entschuldigung.
But the torpedo boat stays behind and picks up survivors.
And then hundreds of people surrounded the ship who needed rescuing. And there were hundreds of dead. You couldn't tell one from the other. And of course it was a terrible situation because what had happened to the Gustav could just as easily have happened to us. But I said, rescue comes first, you have to take the risk. And then suddenly there was a miracle on the bridge. The captain of the Gustav appeared. That was quite an encounter, quite a surprise. He was dry. And the commander of the U-boat cadets appeared. Dry.
All 4 captains survive, while thousands of their passengers die. The torpedo boat saves as many as it can, but they're not out of danger. The S-13 sub torpedoes the rescuers too.
I was standing on the starboard bridge wing and I saw them, quite well spaced. And then there was only one thing to do. Full ahead and hard a starboard.
The escort boat retaliates. But the Russians manage to escape. 564 passengers are rescued from the freezing water.
Then my first officer came to me and said, Herr Kaloy, Kaloy is what we call a lieutenant commander on the ship. We can't pick up anymore. It's over. I said, all right, then we'll stop. And with a heavy heart, we left the site of the sinking.
But other rescue ships are on their way.
And suddenly there was a ship, a big ship not too far away. Oh dear God, where did that come from? No one saw it coming. And then they threw the rope across and tied it on. And then all I could do is hold up my hands, and they dragged me up, and I fainted.
Auf einmal steht ein
A sailor stood in the doorway, looking at
Mann
me,
in der Tür und
looking at me intently.
guckt mich an. Und seine
I
Blicke
look back at
ziehen
him,
mich
and he
richtig
says,
an. Ich gucke ihn auch
"There's a
an.
girl over there who
Und
won't
sagt
stop
er zu
wailing
mir,
about
"Da
her
drüben
sister."
ist eine, die
And she
jammert
looks
immer
a
so um
lot
ihre
like you.
Schwester. Und die sieht ihn
And then
so
off he goes
ähnlich.
and fetches Rosemary. And I
Dann
jump
geht er
up.
und holt die
We hug
Rosemarie.
each other
Ich spring
and
auf
laugh
und
and
wir
cry.
umarmen uns. Wir lachen und weinen.
Most others have nothing to celebrate. By morning, the last rescue ships reach the scene. They find total silence.
We got to the site of the sinking. As far as the eye could see, it was covered with clothes, coats, shoes, heaven knows what else floating around.
The lifeboats are quiet.
Und in einem dieser Boote waren dann
And in one of those boats,
Tote
there were
zu
dead
sehen,
bodies.
also weibliche
bodies of
Leichen
women
und
and
auch
bodies of
Kinder.
children.
Und dieses Boot wurde dann von meinem späteren
And my
Vater
future
geändert
father
und
went on board and in the stern he found a woolen bundle, a woolen blanket, stiff with ice. And when he took a closer look, it turned out to be me.
The child is about a year old. It's been in the cold for 7 hours.
Oh, I said, it's a baby. He shifted the blanket a bit and I could see the blue romper suit. And that used to be a sign it was a boy.
The baby has no identification. But Petty Officer Werner Fick isn't about to abandon him.
And he said, listen, can't I have him? And I said, Werner, that would be a good thing. You haven't got any children. You're old enough. I know your wife. That's a good idea.
His family gets a new child, and the boy gets a new home, and a new name, Peter. After the war, many children search for their missing parents.
Wir suchen unsere Muttis und Tatis, bitte helft sie uns wiederfinden.
And many parents search desperately for their lost children.
Of course, I noticed that couples were continually coming to see my parents, to see if I was their son. And of course, all these visits were a strain for my parents.
Many families are reunited. But Peter's biological parents never come. He finds a new home.
It was a family home that was full of love. And the man who found me took me in and brought me up. He's my father, and my real father.
9 ships rescue the survivors, bringing most to the western ports at last. Approximately 1,230 passengers survive, out of more than 10,000. Over 9,000 drown in the icy waters, 6 times the number that die on the Titanic. But the torpedoing of the Wilhelm Gustloff is not considered a war crime.
The Gustloff was sailing in combat waters with its lights switched off. It was carrying anti-aircraft guns. It wasn't sailing under the Red Cross. It had 1,000 trained U-boat personnel on board. The sinking of the Gustloff was an entirely legal act of war. It wasn't a war crime.
The Russian crew of the S-13 gets little recognition for sinking the Gustloff.
For years, our naval staff doubted that Alexander Marinesco had sunk the Gustloff. They believed the Air Force had bombed it. That's why there were no medals. Especially since Marinesco was a very awkward figure for the senior staff. So they made sure he was kept quiet.
27 years after his death, Marinesco is declared a hero of the Soviet Union. But this doesn't anger the Gustloff survivors.
Marinesco wasn't responsible for sinking the Gustloff, and the torpedoes were only the catalyst. The whole thing started on the 30th of January 1933, not the 30th of January 1945.
Before World War II is over, hundreds of thousands more will die. Soldiers, prisoners, and civilians, many of them anonymously. The Gustloff survivors remember.
A survivor once said, "The dead are all right." They have it behind them.
Sie haben es überstanden.
We die every year.
Wir sterben jedes Jahr.
I've thought about that a lot, and he's right.